So as we are in the heart of summer break, and summer vacation is actually about halfway over. Sorry for the reminder, Katie. That means that we are still in the middle of the summer vacation season, when families will go and travel and do all sorts of stuff before school gets started here sooner than you think. And it brings to mind a question that I think gets asked from time to time, and it's a question I'm going to pose to you today. What is the longest trip you've ever taken? Now, hold on a second, because on the surface, that might sound like it's a question about distance, like how many miles away is the furthest trip that you've ever been on? But that's not the question I'm asking. Maybe you're thinking I'm asking, what's the longest amount of time that you've been away from home? And that's not the question either. Because as you well know, that if you're enjoying the ride out to wherever it is that you're going, it doesn't matter how many miles you're traveling, you're having a great time. Time is going to fly for you. And the best vacations that we ever get, man, it feels like we never want them to end. No matter how much time we're spending on it, we don't want it to end. But we also know that if you're traveling with somebody who's not very much fun to be around, even just a 10-mile drive can feel like an eternity. And we also know that if you're not enjoying yourself, even the single day trip can feel like years off of your life. So let me ask again, what's the longest trip you've ever been on? For me, it is ironically both the furthest distance and the longest amount of time I've been away from home that was also the longest trip I've ever been on. It was the summer immediately following my high school graduation. My parents decided that they wanted to go and see the Grand Canyon. Now, typically in Bogue family vacations, and I believe I've shared this with you already before, after about 4 days, we were kind of sick of each other. So those week-long vacations were already pretty long as it was. So you can imagine my surprise when my parents told us that we were going to be in Sedona, Arizona for 2 weeks. But for my brother, my father, and I, it was actually going to be closer to 3 because my dad does not like to fly anywhere. And so he decided that my brother and I and he, his choice, not mine, we're going to drive from Kokomo, Indiana to Sedona, Arizona, which is about 2.5 days one way. Without cell phones, without much in the way of technology. I mean, I burned through 2 books just in driving with my family. By day 4, we were getting a little tired of each other. By day 6, we weren't speaking to each other. By day 8, I had sweat through all of the clothes that I brought with me. By day 9, my brother and I were begging our parents to let us go home early because this trip was meant to be a great time for our family, but at the same time, it just ended up becoming a very lengthy time where we were just forced to be around each other. And you know, without going too much into detail, there's a reason why my folks are divorced today. And it's also, I don't know why we picked Arizona, because I don't know if you know this about me. I'm a big guy. And so I'm an indoors boy in the summertime. I don't know whose idea it was to have an outdoor service today, but that was exciting. It's okay. I know this first page. If we get 3 pages in, then I'm a problem. But I was sweaty. I didn't like it. And we were in the hottest area in the nation in the hottest month of the year. And so this whole vacation out at the end of it, even though it was only 2 weeks or 3 weeks, if you count the drive, it took whole decades off of my life, I'm guessing, by the end of all of it. Have a less than ideal trip very long just how grateful you are to finally be where you're supposed to be, to finally get that destination. You're thinking about all the things that you're going to be doing while you're there. Or maybe for you, it's just getting home after the lengthy trip that you're just so excited for, that you want to be able to go. Maybe during that entire trip, it just wasn't the way that you planned it to be. Maybe it rained the whole time that you were there. Maybe it was just kind of a miserable experience. Maybe the hotel lost your reservation. Maybe the hotel had a water main break and your reservation had to be canceled anyway. And it was a town that has both a car show and a gigantic conference going on the same weekend as your best friend's destination wedding in Virginia, of all places, which makes no sense because both he and his bride-to-be's family all lived in Indiana. And you're not sure why you're there in the first place, but you got to settle for a ticked up price for one night because that's the only one that's guaranteed. So you got to find another hotel the next night. Just me? I will eventually. I'll let it go eventually. The thing is that a lot of factors can make a trip feel much longer than it actually is meant to be. A lot of different things can happen, but usually we can feel that sense of relief once we get where we're going. Because now we know that the journey itself is over. We can finally get to this spot and we can enjoy ourselves even just a little bit. And so anything that might come that would delay our finally reaching the destination, as annoying as it might be, it is amplified tremendously so. Because it can make everything feel like the worst possible experience of our lives. And I imagine that for the Israelites in today's text, it kind of was. Now, to really understand why I think this is such a big deal, I think we need to understand a few things about this trip that we've not really discussed up to this particular point. Understand that we know that this trip got started when the Israelites were finally released from their slavery in Egypt. That after 430 years of being held captive by this foreign nation, they were finally let go and allowed to leave. And we know that the end result of this trip, we've talked about this as the purpose of the trip, is for them to go and establish the promised land of God, to finally make good on a promise that God made to Abraham over 500 years beforehand. That they are finally going to be able to go there. They're finally going to be able to establish their own nation, their own country that's going to be their own place. And you know how big that is. There is a bee flying next to me. Cool. We're going to be good. Everything's fine. But here's the thing. Depending on where your starting point is, the distance between Egypt and the land of Canaan, which would ultimately become the promised land, is somewhere between 150 and 250 miles. Now, to us in our context, that doesn't sound like all that big of a deal. For instance, right now, Mandy and the girls are on their way back from Kokomo. That's about 230 miles from here to there. And they're going to be here roughly by 2 o'clock this afternoon at the latest, depending on how many times my daughters convince their mother to stop. But you reach a certain point once you get to, Van Wert, Ohio, where there's nothing until you get to Upper Sandusky. It's exciting. You can sleep through that trip, and I think I have a couple of times. But it's about that long of a distance. And so this is before the days of cars, obviously. So that means that they've got to walk all the way there. And for a normal, average, healthy individual, if they wanted to walk 150 to 250 miles, it's going to take them roughly 1 to 2 weeks. That's without taking days off. That's without stopping for longer than to just eat and sleep and do whatever else you have to do on that trip. But we're not talking about one individual. We're not even talking about a family of 10. We're talking about well over 100,000 people moving from one spot to another. And when you're talking about that many people, you are talking about quite a broad age range. So you've got people who are older, who are maybe dealing with arthritis issues or other mobility problems that have to be transported from this place to the next. You're also talking about toddlers and even younger who can't walk for long distances, if at all, and have to make frequent stops themselves as well. You are transporting well over 100,000 people at minimum 150 miles. And so most biblical scholars estimate that it has taken between 1.5 years to 2 years for them to finally reach where we are in today's text. And today we're actually going to be in the book of Numbers. We're going to be in Numbers chapter 13 and 14 because this journey has taken so long. We finished one book. We even got all of Leviticus and 12 chapters of Numbers. So that's a lengthy journey. So if you want to turn there in your Bibles or on your apps, you can. Numbers 13 and 14, that's where we're going to be. But when you stop and consider the scope of everything that the Israelites saw during this time period, when you stop to consider everything that God has done for them along the way, it would feel overwhelming. Right? If we experienced one of these things, it was something we would talk about for decades to come, and they experienced all of this in a span of 1.5 to 2 years. We're talking about seeing all 10 plagues in Egypt. We're talking about the Red Sea parting. We're talking about the Egyptian army being wiped out entirely. We are talking about the manna, the water, the clouds, the pillar of fire. Could you imagine if that just showed up right now? Anytime. All right. They got to see the voice, the thunder, the law being given to them. Last week, they got to face all kinds of consequences because of the choices that they had made. They have seen God move in ways that you and I could only guess at what it feels like. And if that's not enough, there's a little moment in Exodus chapter 34, verse 10, where God reestablishes his covenant for Israel, and he lets them know that there's going to be even more. Here's what it says. And he said, "Behold, I am making a covenant before all of your people. I will do marvels such as have not been created in all the earth or in any nation. And all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it is an awesome thing I will do with you." If you keep in mind the scope of just everything that God has done, and here in this one verse, God hints at the idea that compared to what they're going to see when they get to the promised land, all of that was child's play. That's wild to really consider that. The notion that God himself is saying, hey, all this great stuff that you've seen me do already, every meal that you never had to prepare, I did it for you. Every time you didn't know where to go, you just looked up. The Egyptian army barreling down on you, I got it. And God is saying, all that's just going to look like a Tuesday compared to what's going to happen. This is wild to consider when all of this is going to happen. And everything right now, especially given when we keep in mind what happened last week, everything seems to be going really, really well for the relationship between God and the Israelites. Again, they had that moment with the golden calf, and I'm certain that everybody and their brother regrets that moment. I mean, because probably for most people, it cost them their brother. But they got this out of the way sort of situation. And when God kind of finishes his punishment of the Israelites, he again, like a loving father, brings them back into the fold. And things are so good that they actually start construction on the tabernacle, which is essentially going to be a mobile temple for them to come and worship God together. For them all to gather together as people and come and be with God. But then after that, they start talking about the expansion of the laws that are going to be in this nation. Understand that things with them and God are so good. The Exodus actually ends with the finished construction of the tabernacle. And when the presence of God enters that place, it is so overwhelming that no one else can go in. That God and the Israelites have reestablished their covenant with each other, and things in their relationship are so good that they are actively making plans for the future. This is an exciting time, and Numbers 13 starts on the cusp of everything. For 1.5 to 2 years, we have been traveling along with the whole idea that eventually we're going to make our way to the promised land. And when Numbers 13 gets started, we are outside the promised land. We are finally here. Everything that God has promised us for half a millennia is just right over there. But here's the thing. You got to kind of get an idea of what the land is that you're going into, right? You don't want to just go marching in blind, half-cocked. You're going to cause some problems for yourself. And so God gives Moses an idea in verse 2. He says, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of your fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them. It's going to be the responsibility of these guys to go into the land of Canaan and get a lay of the land, if you will. They're going to see if the promised land itself is just as good as they've always hoped it would be. But they're also going to be scouting the people that are currently in that land. Again, remember that these are a bunch of people who have never been in a battle before in their lives. And so they need to know, what are we up against? And so the way they're going to find out is that Moses is going to send in 12 different spies to go and look at the whole land. And so these guys, they make their way in there with their walking staffs that double as two-way radios because they're spies. And they're going to go and they're going to get a lay of everything that's going on. They're going to get the full lay of everything. But you can't just do that in a day or two. It's going to take some time. You got to look at every nook and cranny that you possibly can without raising any sort of suspicion. You have to try to be as covert as you possibly can to feel like you're supposed to be there, even though you know you're not supposed to be. They've got to look at all these other things. They've got to know how tough the people look, but they also got to know how to strategically take over whole towns at a time. You want to know how good the land is, but you also want to know, are there any weak points that we could capitalize on to minimize our own casualties? There is a strategy that needs to be developed. There's a game plan that has to be drawn up, and you need to get as much information as you possibly can to know what you're going to be up against. And so that means that it's going to take these spies some time, especially while they're drinking their vodka martini, shaken, not stirred. I know, I'm sorry. And it takes them 40 days to look over everything. 40 days of these spies looking over everything that they can possibly get their eyeballs on. 40 days of seeking out if there's any place where they can get an advantage. 40 days of learning how strong the opposition is. But after those 40 days, these spies return home in their Aston Martins that double as submarines. It's the last one, I promise. Mandy rolled her eyes at that one when I told it to her. And when they finally get back, the entire congregation is out there waiting for them because they all want to know, what are we up against? They all want to know, what is this land going to be like? They all want to know exactly what's going to happen. And at first, everything seems like it's going to be great because, of course, you're going to start with the good news, right? Everybody wants to start with the good news at all times. And so they show the people the fruit that they brought from the land. They bring some grapes. They bring some figs. They bring some pomegranates. And in verse 27, it says, and they told him, we came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Now, real quick aside, as a kid, I remember being baffled by the phrase, flows with milk and honey. And I used to try to figure out, what does that mean? What does it look like? Because I always pictured like rivers, but, of milk. Seemed like that would spoil. And then I thought of other rivers of honey, which seemed like the current's going to be really slow. So I looked it up for you, and the term flows with milk and honey just means that it's going to be very prosperous and abundant. And I like my vision better. But that's okay. So they give them all this good news that, hey man, this land is going to be even better than we ever thought it was going to be. This is going to be a place where we could grow anything that we want to, and it is going to grow rich and abundant, and it's going to be amazing. We're going to grow the best vegetables you've ever seen in your life. We're going to grow amazing fruit. This is going to be the best. And then the other shoe drops. Because if we're going to give you the good news, we got to give you the bad news too, don't we? In verse 28, they say exactly what that bad news is. However, I hate it when things start with however. The people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. These guys are huge. And they're like muscular, they're ripped, they're torn. You could picture me if you really want to, that's fine. Just a whole land of Brandon. That would be terrifying, but not for the reasons you think. They're just gigantic people. They're fortified cities. This is going to be difficult for us to overtake because they're strong. They know what they're doing, and their cities are built in such a way that it's going to be really hard for us to gain any sort of an advantage. Most of the spies that went into the land think that if we're going in there, we're getting creamed. There's really only one of them that stands up and says something different, and that's a little guy by the name of Caleb. And I imagine Caleb as being a 13-year-old boy. And I say that because the only thing that we hear from him is in verse 30. He says, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." And there is nobody that has more confidence than a 13-year-old boy who should not have confidence in the moment. He is the only voice that's saying, let's go do this thing out of all the other spies that are here. Now, here's the thing. We've spent a bit of time with these people, haven't we? And so after 2 months of getting to know them a little bit better, I'm guessing you can probably assume which one of the news is that they're more focused on than the other. They're terrified. Again. They are terrified of what is awaiting them. They don't know what's going to happen. It's the size of the people. It's the fortification of the cities. It's how difficult a task that this is going to be for them that they are focused on. And so chapter 14 actually starts with them playing the hits a little bit. It says, then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. Good start. Real good start. And again, verse 2, they gotta play the old faithful ones. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness." Now, again, we've spent a couple of months now with these folks, and I got to tell you, I kind of find it hilarious that their immediate reaction to any sort of inconvenience for them is, "I wish we were dead, just not here." It's weird. But they do add a new wrinkle in verse 3. They say, "Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" It's not the first time they've speculated at the notion of going back to Egypt, is it? This seems to be a reoccurring theme to them, that things are a little hard for us right now. It was easier for us back in slavery. Never mind the fact that for 400 years we pleaded with God to let us out of our slavery. God finally does it, and every time we come across an inconvenience, they're saying we should just go back. Human beings will always fall back on what is familiar, whether or not it's good for them. We will always fall back on the things that are familiar to us, because new is scary. But this time they go too far. Because verse 4 says, "And they said to one another, 'Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt.'" Up until now, it's all been talk. It's all been them saying, maybe we should go back. I think things were better for us when we went back there. I think we should maybe consider going back this time. And, hey, who's going to lead us back? This is no longer speculation. This is active planning. And this is where God says, I've had enough now. Think of how many things God has done for these people, how many times he has shown up for them, and now they're going to go back. Here's what God says in verse 11. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people despise me? And how long will they not believe in me in spite of all the signs I have done among them?" I mean, think of the magnitude of what God has just said here. Again, I know we've already run through this list of what God has done in the 2 years or so that we've been traveling here, but think about all of it. They needed to get out of Egypt in the first place, but Pharaoh wasn't going to let them go. So God sent 10 different plagues to showcase the idea that the Pharaoh's gods are nothing, including Pharaoh himself. Then as they're leaving the place, they come across the Red Sea when the Egyptian army decides, now we're going to get them back, and they got nowhere to turn. So God parts the waters for them and dries the ground that has been underwater for probably thousands of years at that point in time. And then as the Egyptian army continues to chase them through these parted waters, which has always struck me as kind of weird, like you'd think at least one Egyptian army guy would go, guys. But no, God decides to wipe out the entire Egyptian army without a single Israelite raising a finger. He has already showcased to them, I can handle your biggest problem without you having to do a thing. God has shown them time after time after time that I am in your corner, that I've got your back, and that I am bigger than whatever problem it is that you're going to face. And still, that echoed really well. And still, they want to go back to Egypt. God gets so angry, he even contemplates wiping them out and starting over with Moses. It has taken us 500 years to get to this point. And God is ready to say, you know what? I'm done with these people. We're hitting the reset button. But instead, God decides to do something that might just hurt them even more. Again, they've spent the better part of 2 years traveling here. And God lets them know they're not done with walking around. Verses 21 through 23 say, truly as I live, and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the test these 10 times and have not obeyed my voice, shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers. And none of those who despise me shall see it. Instead of being the ones to finally enter the promised land. Again, this is all the way back to Abraham himself. And instead of being the ones who get to see this, God tells them it's going to be their kids who get to. That this entire generation of people are going to have to die before the Israelites can enter into the promised land. That they're going to spend the next 4 decades aimlessly wandering around until the last person who said we should go back to Egypt is dead and buried. The only 2 exceptions are Caleb, who believed that God could still do this. You gotta love a 13-year-old, right? And Joshua, who also stood up for the Lord. Everybody else is not going with us. Hundreds of thousands of people are not going. Think about everything they've lost for a moment. They were supposed to be the ones to see the fulfillment of the promise that they would remind each other of during their worst days in slavery. The one hope that would keep all of them going. And every time, whenever they finally have a day where they're just dead dog tired because they've been beaten and they've been forced to do this heavy, heavy labor. So to kind of comfort one another, they just whisper, you know, when I get to the promised land, I think I'm going to do this. Or, you know, first thing I'm going to do when we get to the promised land, man, I'm going to go and do. Well, now nothing. Because they're not going to get to see the promised land. And why? Because they doubted that God could handle the situation for them. In spite of everything that they've seen, in spite of all the ways that God has shown up for them and showcased his love for them and protected them and nurtured them literally, they still doubt. But that's not the only thing that they miss. That's not the only thing that they lose out on, because remember Exodus 34, verse 10. He said, "Behold, I am making a covenant. Before all your people, I will do marvels such as have not been created in all the earth or in any nation. And all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord. It is an awesome thing that I will do with you." He promised them that they were going to get to see even more incredible acts of God. But because they doubted that God could do exactly what God has done already, they're going to miss out. They're going to miss out on the glory of God. And it makes me wonder how much of God we miss out on because of our own doubts. Please don't misunderstand me. I am not in any way, shape, or form trying to make anybody feel bad for having doubts of God, because I'm not saying you're a bad Christian if you doubt God, because if I say that, then that means that I'm a bad Christian too. Because there are times that certainly I carry my own doubts of God and who he is and what he can do and what he can make happen in my own life. But I genuinely think that when we doubt God, that we miss out on the goodness and the glory and the power and the majesty and the love of God. I don't know what it is about us as human beings that every time we face something that is even moderately inconvenience for us, our first reaction is to flip out and lose our minds. We get hit with a strain that we're not sure how we're going to take care of financially. Something takes place and it hits our pocketbooks, and we have no idea how we're ever going to financially recover from it. The doc comes into the room. He's got a look on his face that just tells you he's not going to have great news for you. Or some other thing happens and it just instantly fills us with fear. And fear has this weird element to it where nothing ever seems as big or as powerful as the thing that we're afraid of. It is all consuming. Is it not? I know for me that when those things happen, I tend to look a little too much like the Israelites and not enough like Caleb. Because I get scared immediately. I start worrying about things that are outside of my control and trying to figure out how am I going to get it under my control. And I tell you, most of the time it's not supposed to be in your control. Because God has been faithful to us, has he not? Here's the thing I know about every crisis I've faced in my life. God has gotten me through it. How do I know that? I'm still standing. Right? But so often I've missed the movement of God because I'm so consumed with the fear. That once the situation resolves itself, once the thing has passed, once the crisis is over, I missed how God moved in it. We miss out on the goodness of God because we are so focused on how big the current problem is. But please, please, please hear me when I say this. The current problem that you are facing is nothing compared with our God. I'll say that again for you. The current problem, whatever that problem may be, is nothing compared with God. The God who is powerful enough that just at the whisper of his voice, all of this is here. God who is powerful enough when the bad guys are rolling towards him, he parts the water and dries the ground. Can't help but wonder how much of God's goodness, God's glory have I missed out on because of my doubt. Because God has gotten me through my previous crises. We can be confident that he's going to get me through the current crisis. And he'll probably get us through the next one too. But even if he doesn't, even if the next crisis is the final crisis for us, Christians, we should still have hope. Because this world is not the final goal. This world is not the final result. Our whole faith is built around the idea that God is going to create a new heaven and a new earth because of what Jesus did on the cross for us. And so whatever crisis that you're going to face today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, doesn't matter because Christ has already overcome the world. And because of him, we will too. The only question that should ever concern us, the only question that should keep us up at night is the question of how much has our doubt caused us to miss out on God and his glory. As David would write in Psalm chapter 56, verses 1 through 4, and I rarely do this when it comes to the closing verse, but I think this is important. Context matters. David is currently being held captive by the Philistines, the big bad of David's time. He is being held captive when he pens Psalm 56, 1 through 4, saying, "Be gracious to me, O God, for man tramples on me. All day long an attacker oppresses me. My enemies trample on me all day long, for many attack me proudly. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, in God I trust. I shall not be afraid." I love this last part. What can flesh do to me?